Right. Welcome. Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome to the broadcast, people. Welcome to the broadcast, people. As usual, you know how I start. Today is a monumental day because you're here to see it. How about that? You're able to get up this morning, get off the side of your bed, stand up, go and take care of your care duties, have some breakfast if you got some in the house, or do whatever you do, your ritual, and you can get going. Today, we're going to go right back to where we were. We were on the title of the Quest to be the Best, and we're going to be reading from the 33 Strategies of War. Now, I'm hoping that by now you have downloaded or purchased the book, The 33 Strategies of War, and you can find it. You can find it on PDF Drive. Okay, you can find it on PDF Drive. Now, what I'm hoping that you'll understand is that as you read this, and as I talk about it, there may be some times when some of the things I say, you will disagree with, and that's okay. You can disagree with it. It is very much fine that you disagree. All right. And the reason it's fine is because if you disagree, you're listening. Would you agree with that? All right. So we're gonna get right into it. Okay. We're gonna start right back where we left off, and that was, of course, on page 41. Okay. Now we want to start right where we left off yesterday. Okay. And I think this is tough enough, it is poignant enough that we want to read this part again so that we can get into where we are. Okay, we were reading from the slave narrative of Frederick Douglass, who had realized that learning to read was an asset. And even though the woman who was teaching him, okay, didn't know his destiny, when it was told, order was given to stop teaching him, he had enough. He had enough that he could go on ahead and move on his own. So the next paragraph talks about Jean Piaget. If you are involved in psychology, you know who this guy is. Okay. Jean Piaget was the guy who believed that your psychology is based on your environment and that we are products of our environment. So this is what he writes. He says, Jean Piaget saw conflict as a critical part of mental development. Through battles with peers and with parents, children learn to adapt to the world and develop strategies for dealing with problems. And I'll add to that, more specifically, the types of people and learning how to deal with different types of people. Sometimes we can, as a person writes their theory, um, they assume that you and them are on the same page, and so you're following them. So we understand this is dealing with the problems. Well, what kind of problems could he be training for or being prepared for? Well, it's in the paragraph, and it says battles with peers and with parents. So we know from that inference, we put it in context, he's talking about people, how to deal with people. Those children who seek to avoid conflict at all costs, or those who have overprotective parents, end up handicapped socially and mentally. Now, I want to add something there because we understand that um, as Dark Americans wrestle with the idea that there's been slavery, that our ancestors have dealt with slavery, and as Dr. Joy DeGruy writes, that that pathology is responsible for a lot of the problems that people have today. Now, the naivete of light Americans, or the plausible deniability of light Americans, make it so that they don't understand what we're going through. And that's because most of them have been shielded by the benefits of the slavery. Now, it might appear to some that this it can appear racist, but understand racism. Racism is a system, and it's not a frame of mind. And the frame of mind that operates within the system of racism is prejudice and indifference. Okay, there can also be some sadistic aspects of it. There's really not much good in a system that marginalizes and treats people of of another race, culture, or persuasion as lower life forms. Can't be much good in that. So let's keep moving. The same is true with adults. It is through your battles with others that you learn what works, what doesn't, and how to protect yourself. Well, some of us do. Some of us do learn from them. The question here is, what do you learn? Do you learn how to avoid? Or do you learn strategies on how to get around them? Or how do you learn strategies on how to become, have a coexistence? That's in the air. Instead of shrinking from the idea of having enemies, embrace it. Conflict is therapeutic. I like that phrase. If you're a martial artist, you understand that. You understand that that's what we do. We simulate conflict so that you will learn how to deal with the actual conflict. Enemies bring many gifts. For one thing, they motivate you and focus your beliefs. A tough opponent will bring out the best in you. The bigger the opponent, the greater the reward, even in defeat. One of my favorite phrases is, the tougher the battle, the sweeter the victory. Being attacked is a sign that you are important enough to be a target. Listen here, Dark Americans. Listen carefully. You are important. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is find out why you are so important to them. Okay? Don't forget about what they're doing. But remember something. There's a path that they haven't gone down, or they can't go down and won't go down. It is that path that's tailor-made for you. You can figure out what's going on, and so that you can readjust your position. If you're a true warrior, then that's all you're concerned about. The best position. So that you can do the most with the least amount of effort. Now, you should relish the attention and the chance to prove yourself. We all have aggressive impulses that we are forced to repress. An enemy supplies you with an outlet for those drives. At least you have someone on whom to unleash your aggression without feeling guilty. Listen here. Defense. One of my mentors, one of my many mentors, he has this statement whenever he has a self-defense encounter, and he has to defend himself, which means he's going to have to hit somebody. He says, upon calling the police, this is what you tell them: he used me to hurt himself. I thought it was pretty funny. It's funny, but that's what they'll do. They'll use your energies to hurt themselves if you are doing what you should be doing. All right. Now, let's go ahead on and continue from here. It says leaders have always found it useful to have an enemy at their gates in times of trouble, distracting the public from their difficulties, and using your enemies to rally your troops, polarize them as far as possible. They will fight the more fiercely when they feel a little hatred. So exaggerate the differences between you and your enemy. Draw the lines clearly. Xenophon made no effort to be fair. He did not say that the Persians weren't really such a bad lot and had done much to advance civilization. He called them barbarians, the antithesis of the Greeks. He described their recent treachery, and he said that they were an evil culture that could find no favor with the gods. And so it is with you. Victory is your goal, not fairness and balance. Use the rhetoric of war to heighten the stakes and stimulate the spirit. What you want in warfare is room to maneuver. Tight corners spell death. Having enemies gives you options. You can play them off against each other, make one a friend as well as attacking the other, and so it's on and on. Without enemies, you will not know how or where to maneuver. And you will lose your sense of limits, of how far you can go. Early on, Julius Caesar identified Pompey as his enemy. Measuring his actions and calculating carefully, he did only those things that left him in a solid position in relation to Pompey. When the war finally broke out between the two men, Caesar was at his best. But once he defeated Pompey and had no more such rivals, he lost all sense of proportion. In fact, he fancied himself a god. His defeat of Pompey was his own undoing. Your enemies force you on a sense of realism and humility. Remember, there are always people out there who are more aggressive, more devious, more ruthless than you are, and it is inevitable that some of them will cross your path. You will have a tendency to want to conciliate and compromise with them. The reason is that such types are often brilliant deceivers who see the strategic value in charm or in seeming to allow you plenty of space, but actually their desires have no limit, and they are simply trying to disarm you. With some people, you have to harden yourself to recognize that there is no middle ground, no hope of conciliation. For your opponent, your desire is to compromise is a weapon to use against you. Know these dangerous enemies by their past. Look for quick power grabs, sudden rises in fortune, previous acts of treachery. Once you suspect you are dealing with a Napoleon, do not lay down your arms or entrust them to someone else. You are the last line of your own defense. Can y'all see that? Hope you can. That's why you need to download this so you can see this yourself and meditate on it. Listen here. It says, the earth, the enemy is the ground beneath your feet. It is a gravity that holds you in place, a force of resistance. Root yourself deep in this earth to gain firmness and strength. Without an enemy to walk upon, to trample, you lose your bearings in all sense of proportion. If you count on safety and do not think of danger, if you do not know enough to be wary when enemies arrive, this is called a sparrow nesting on a tent, a fish swimming in a cauldron. They won't last a day. Are you hearing that? I want that to sink in for just a minute. All right? If that happens to be you, there's another saying. It says to seek safety, one must go to the heart of danger. Okay? Bring it. Make them bring it. Okay? Because you'll find that they're only a 2-rounder and you're a 10-rounder. After that second round, they ain't got no more gas. All right. Watch this. Always keep the search for and use of enemies under control. It is clarity you want, not paranoia. Are you listening to that? I gotta highlight that. It is clarity you want, not paranoia. It is the downfall of many tyrants to see an enemy in everyone. They lose their grip on reality and become hopelessly embroiled in the emotions their paranoia churns up. By keeping an eye on possible enemies, you are simply being prudent and cautious. Keep your suspicions to yourselves so that if you're wrong, no one will know. Also, beware of polarizing people so completely that you cannot back off. Margaret Thatcher, usually brilliant at the polarizing game, eventually lost control of it. She created too many enemies and kept repeating the same tactic, even in situations that called for retreat. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a master polarizer, always looking to draw a line between himself and his enemies. Once he had made the line clear enough, though, he backed off, which made him look like a conciliator, a man of peace who occasionally went to war. Even if that impression was false, it was the height of wisdom to create it. All right. So, all right. Just take a minute. Just take a minute and understand a few things. The first thing is, okay, that as you go through your life, listen here, we want to talk about the paradigm of warfare. And if you think of warfare as only the fight, then you'll likely get yourself handed to you on multiple occasions. See, all of life is a strategy. All of life is a war. Everything you do helps you to improve and be better on the next occasion if you survive the prior one. So when you have a situation in a relationship, okay, now the first thing you want to understand is whether you should fight the battle. And this is me personally. Anything I got to do too much fixing to, y'all are not listening to me. Anything I got to do too much fixing to, I don't need. Okay? Because what that will do and what it in the past it has done, it has placed me in a position of stagnicity. I couldn't move forward. I had to be so concerned about the little quirks and foolishness going on with others that I was ended up wasting a whole lot of time. I often talk about my experiences as a young minister and being good at evangelism and being able to talk to people and help people to understand the nuances that confuse them in scripture. And they finally come to the mission. And before they can get their foot in the door and actually accept the reality of Christ, the pastor and the preachers beat them to death. Talking about how they dress, talking about how they look, talking about just talking noise instead of just going ahead and preaching. And one thing I found out about this religion, so-called Christianity, and see, I found the true Christianity, so I understand what that's about. But this concoction that's filled with charters and corporate status and tax things, paperwork, that mess, it serves to hurt a lot of people, and it has. Are trying to get more people into their fellowship, get more people into their church. Trying to get more people to be a part of their work. Okay. When here's the reality, it ain't your work at all. It never has been, never will be. And even if we can call ourselves founder, but the whole idea of founding is actually a gathering work. You lay a milestone and you keep moving. And it's the same in relationships, just the same. There's just not that much different. And once you realize that one action in your life is not that much different from the other action in your life, then you'll go a whole lot further. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Everybody familiar with the shape circle, right? Everybody familiar with it? All right. Watch this. See this right here? If I look at it like this, what is that? That, my friends, is a circle in its one-dimensional plane. See this? Like this. This is my follow. That is a circle. You see that? See that? What is that? A circle. See that? A circle in its one-dimensional plane. So you can find circles everywhere. They're just in a different application. It's the same with truths. There are truths that are applicable to different situations. It's just a matter of how you apply it. Let's go back to the read. Do not fight the last war. I remember watching the movie Fearless, where Jet Li played Yao Wang Jia, who was the founder of the Jingwu Martial Arts Federation in China back in the 1400s. All right. He watched his father train, and he would be in his kwoon, his private kwoon, and he's training and he's doing all kinds of stuff. And he had this brick set up, this block, this big, huge patio block, stone, whatever. It was maybe about 6 to 8 inches thick and about 4 feet wide. And he had it placed on these things, and he had a cloth over the top of it. Okay. And he would train himself that when he hit that block, it didn't seem like anything happened. Okay. Prior to this, in China, they used to have these competitions of different martial arts styles. They would go into the center of town and they would have these competitions, and they would have to sign the death waiver and all that kind of stuff. Well, Yao Wang Jia's father got involved, got challenged by someone. And while he was fighting, he had the opportunity to strike the death blow, but he held back. And the guy knocked him off the platform. And that was the rules. The rules were either you died in the ring or you got knocked off the platform. Okay. And so he got knocked off the platform, battle's over. Well, the idea was, when do you strike the final blow, the blow that's going to take your opponent out? We're going to find out about that. Do not fight the last war. The guerrilla war of the mind strategy. All right. So let's read. What most often weighs you down and brings you misery in the past is in the form of unnecessary attachments, repetitions of tired formulas, and the memory of old victories and defeats. You must consciously wage war against the past and force yourself to react to the present moment. Be ruthless on yourself. Do not repeat the same tired methods. Sometimes you must force yourself to strike out in new directions, even if they involve risk. What you may lose in comfort and security, you will gain in surprise, making it harder for your enemies to tell what you will do. Wage guerrilla war on your mind, allowing no static lines of defense, no exposed citadels. Make everything fluid and mobile. Theory cannot equip the mind with formulas for solving problems, nor can it mark the narrow path on which the sole solution is supposed to lie by planting a hedge of principles on either side, but it can give the mind insight into the great mass of phenomena and of their relationships, then leave it free to rise into the higher realms of action. There, the mind can use its innate talents to capacity, combining them all as to seize on what is right and true, as though this were a single idea formed by their concentrated pressure, as though it were a response to the immediate challenge rather than a product of thought. Karl von Clausewitz, 1780 to 1831. Now, as we get into this, I want you to grab on to something, okay? When authors tell stories of great exploits, oftentimes they don't talk about the exploits of the dark people of the planet, and it's pretty clear as to why. Because a lot of that stuff has been suppressed, but we understand that there were also the great warriors came along long before these guys. In fact, those guys set the stage for these guys. Okay. Hannibal. Oh, and did you know Alexander was a dark-skinned guy? He was Most folks laugh when you tell them that. Listen here, that whole area was dark-skinned folk. Y'all listen to me carefully. Okay? That whole area was dark-skinned folk. Don't let them kid you. Okay? Wasn't nothing but dark skin over there. Different shades of dark, of melanination. So Alexander, Constantine, all them guys, man. So when you look at history and they thought they were doing you a favor by whitewashing it, guess what? They ain't doing nothing but telling you about yourself. Honorable Elijah Muhammad just told us to look behind the words and dig out the truth. But anyway, the last war, no one has risen to power faster than Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1793, he went from captain of the French Revolutionary War to brigadier general. In 1796, he became the leader of the French force in Italy fighting the Austrians, whom he crushed that year. And again, 3 years later, he became first consul of France in 1801, emperor in 1804, and in 1805, he humiliated the Austrian and Russian armies at the Battle of Austerlitz. For many, Napoleon was more than a great general. He was a genius, a god of war. Not everyone was impressed, though. There were Prussian generals who thought he had merely been lucky. Where Napoleon was rash and aggressive, they believed, his opponents had been timid and weak. If he ever faced the Prussians, he would be revealed as a fake. Among the Prussian generals, Friedrich Ludwig, Prince of Hohenlohe-Gelfingen, Hohenlohe-Gelfingen. Hohenlohe-Gelfingen. That's a word, ain't it? Hohenlohe came from the one of Germany's oldest aristocratic families, with an illustrious military record. He began his career young, serving with Friedrich the Great himself, the man who had single-handedly made Prussia a great power. Hohenlohe had risen through the ranks, becoming a general at 50, young by Prussian standards. To Hohenlohe, success in war depended on organization, discipline, and the use of superior strategies developed by trained military minds. The Prussians exemplified all of these values. Prussian soldiers drilled relentlessly until they could perform elaborate maneuvers as precisely as a machine. Prussian generals intensely studied the victories of Friedrich the Great. War for them was a mathematical affair. The application of timeless principles. To the generals, Napoleon was a Corsican hothead. To the generals, Napoleon was a Corsican hothead leading an unruly citizens' army. Superior in knowledge and skill, they would out-strategize him. The French would panic and crumble in the face of the disciplined Prussians. The Napoleonic myth would lie in ruins, and Europe would could return to its old ways. In August 1806, Hohenlohe and his fellow generals finally got what they wanted. King Friedrich Wilhelm III of Prussia, tired of Napoleon's broken promises, decided to declare war on him in 6 weeks. In the meantime, he asked his generals to come up with a plan to crush the French. Hohenlohe was ecstatic. This campaign would be the climax of his career. He had been thinking for years how he could beat Napoleon, and he presented his plan at the generals' first strategy session. Precise marches would place the army at the perfect angle from which to attack the French as they advanced through southern Prussia. An attack in oblique formation, Friedrich the Great's favorite tactic, would deliver a devastating blow. The other generals, all in their 60s and 70s, presented their own plans, but these two were merely variants on the tactics of Frederick the Great. Discussion turned into argument. Several weeks went by. Finally, the king had to step in and create a compromise strategy that would satisfy all of his generals. He often, quite arbitrarily, presses into a system which he foists on Napoleon, and in doing so, completely fails to see what, above all, really constitutes the greatness of this captain, namely the reckless boldness of his operations, where, scoffing at all theory, he always tried to do what suited each occasion best. Okay? So, as you can see, it's a pretty lengthy reading. All right? A feeling of exuberance swept the country, which would soon relive the glory days of Friedrich the Great. The generals realized that Napoleon knew about their plans. He had excellent spies, but the Prussians had a head start, and once their war machine started to move, nothing could stop it. On August 5th, a few days before the king was to declare war, disturbing news reached the generals. A reconnaissance mission revealed that divisions of Napoleon's army, which they had believed was dispersed, had marched east, merged, and was massing deep in southern Prussia. The captain who had led the scouting mission reported that the French soldiers were marching with packs on their backs, where the Prussians used slow-moving wagons to provision their troops. The French carried their own supplies and moved with astonishing speed and mobility. Before the generals had time to adjust their plan, Napoleon's army suddenly wheeled north, heading straight for Berlin in the heart of Prussia. The generals argued and dithered, moving their troops here and there, trying to decide where to attack. A mood of panic set in. Finally, the king ordered a retreat. The troops would reassemble to the north and attack Napoleon's flank as he advanced toward Berlin. Hohenlohe was in charge of the rear guard, protecting the Prussians' retreat. On October 14th, near the town of Jena, Napoleon caught up with Hohenlohe, finally faced the battle he wanted so desperately. The numbers on both sides were equal, but while the French were an unruly force, fighting pell-mell and on the run, Hohenlohe kept his troops in tight order, orchestrating them like a corps du ballet. The fighting went back and forth until finally the French captured the village of Wiesenhaligen. Hohenlohe ordered his troops to retake the village. In a ritual dating back to Friedrich the Great, a drum major beat out the cadence, and the Prussian soldiers, with their colors flying, reformed their positions in perfect parade order. Preparing to advance, they were in an open plain, though, and Napoleon's men were behind garden walls and on rooftops. The Prussians fell like ninepins to the French marksmen. Confused, Hohenlohe ordered his soldiers to halt and change formation. The drums beat again, and the Prussians marched with magnificent precision. What a sight to behold! But the French kept shooting, decimating the Prussian line. Never had Hohenlohe seen such an army. The French soldiers were like demons. Unlike his disciplined soldiers, they moved on their own, yet there was a method to their madness. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, they rushed toward both sides, threatening and surrounding the Prussians. The prince ordered a retreat. The Battle of Jena was over. So, like a house of cards, the Prussians quickly crumbled, one fortress falling after another. The king fled east. In a matter of days, virtually nothing remained of the once mighty Prussian army. The bat and the house ferrets. A bat fell to the ground and was caught by a house ferret. Realizing that he was on the point of being killed, she begged for her life. The house ferret said to her that she couldn't let her go, for ferrets were supposed to be the natural enemy of all birds. The bat replied that she herself was not a bird, but a mouse. She managed to extricate herself from her danger by this means. Eventually, falling a second time, the bat was caught by another house ferret. Again, she pleaded with the ferret not to eat her. The second ferret declared that she absolutely detested all mice, but the bat positively affirmed that she was not a mouse, but a bat. And so she was released again. And that was how she saved herself from death twice by a mere change of name. This fable shows that it's not always necessary to confine yourself to the same tactics, but on the contrary, if we are adaptable to circumstances, we can better escape danger. Are you listening? Aesop's fables. So, understand when we went around and told that big old story, we saw two factions. One of them that thought that discipline and order was the order of the day. But when you're talking about a fight, a real fight, okay, ain't no lines. Ain't no line. There ain't no competition. Okay? We ain't trying to see who look the best. You got to get down and dirty. And if you ain't willing to get down and dirty, you don't need to be in a fight because you're going to lose. And this is what he found out. Okay? If he wanted to find out so bad how Napoleon was winning, guess what? He found out. Okay? And so one person's type of discipline is different than another person's type of discipline. See, because we might look at stuff and it might be chaotic from our vantage point, but from their vantage point, it's very much ordered. Okay? Are you listening? See, sometimes you have to allow your soldiers, allow your warriors, allow those people who are working on your team to be individually as strong within the confines of the structure. I'm reminded of a brick wall, right? When you talk about a brick wall, if you look at a brick wall, they're not perfectly aligned, as in from the ground to up. What they do is they stagger them. They'll put one brick, then they'll put two bricks, then another one brick, and then two bricks, and that's how it looks all the way across. So one might go this one, then the next one they stagger it, then the next one they stagger it the other way, so that the stress is distributed. Now, not each one of those bricks, even though they're cut the exact same way, the composition of that brick, they may differ slightly. But it's the mortar between the blocks that makes the wall strong. Okay? So, what are we talking about here? Dark Americans, we are going to have to understand that the battle that we're fighting is not really against them. The battle is with us. See? If you're thinking about going out and throwing blows, let me tell you something. They've been training their whole life to throw blows. How long you been training? I remember one time I was watching a panel, and Killer Mike was on the panel. And he said, y'all already talking about going back to Africa, talking about having your own stuff, but you don't know how to use firearms? Hello, you don't know how to use firearms? Wait, do you know how to plant your own crops? Do you know how to tap a well? See, you don't know how to do any of the things that's necessary to start something from the ground up, but they have been training their whole life. See, light Americans teach their kids from the ground up. From the time they're able to listen to them, they watch them in their trades. They watch them doing this. Now, granted, this is not blanket. There are some who go on and do their own thing. But however, they still have an innate ability to transmit what they've done in their past, what their forefathers have done, and pass it into the future. What are we doing as Dark Americans to make sure that happens? We still divided, so we can't pass nothing. Still trying to raise our children like light Americans. You can't do that. You need to develop your own identity. Okay, which means that anything that they gave you or they gave our ancestors, we need to give it back to them. Let them have it, because it's not serving The purpose is designed to. Anyway, let's interpret this and then we're going to wrap it up. The reality facing the Prussians in 1806 was simple. They had fallen 50 years behind the times. Their generals were old, and instead of responding to present circumstances, they were repeating formulas of the past. Their army moved slowly, and their soldiers were automations on parade. The Prussian generals that had signs to warn them of disaster. Their army had not performed well in recent engagements. A number of Prussian soldiers had preached reform. And last but not least, they had had 10 years to study Napoleon, his innovative strategies, and the speed and fluidity with which his armies converged on the enemy. Reality was staring them in the face, yet they chose to ignore it. Indeed, they told themselves that Napoleon was the one who was doomed. You might find the Prussian army an interesting historical example, but you are likely marching in the same direction yourself. Listen at that now. What limits individuals as well as nations is the inability to confront reality, to see things for what they are. As we grow older, we become more rooted in the past. Habit takes over. Something has worked for us before becomes a doctrine, a shell to protect us from reality. Repetition replaces creativity. We rarely realize we're doing this because it's almost impossible for us to see it happening in our own minds. Let me go back. What limits individuals as well as nations is the inability to confront reality, to see things as they are. Let me highlight that. Come on. Okay? Now look at our churches. Are you listening? There's a technique that we used to use in the martial arts that made a person really fearful of you. What we would do is we would encourage them to push forward, and we offer them resistance until they're almost at the point of giving 80% of their energy, and then we'd sidestep them and let them fly by. Or we'd be pulling them. We'd pull them, and we allow them to get to the point that they think that they're getting ready to lose. They give 100%, and we let them go, and they start falling over backwards. This is what's happening to the church. See, you can tell when people start chasing the wrong things because they start using wrong tactics. I'm still trying to figure out how the praise dance became something to do in church. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to figure out how it's more important for kids to dance than to learn. Where are the schools? We should be educating as opposed to trying to entice people with activities. And this is why they don't respect the church now, because everybody needs a milestone, something that says this is the limit, this is as far as you go, and that's it, and this is the way it is, and if you don't like it, there it is. So if we stay that way, when it comes time we can make that applicable to this time. But there's been no standard really, and there's nothing codified in terms of what? Something that the whole community can agree on. And so when things change, they're powerless into meeting the challenge. Okay? See? It says as we grow older, we become rooted in the past. We don't realize we're doing it. Okay? Then suddenly a young Napoleon crosses our path, a person who does not respect tradition, who fights in a new way. Only then do we see ourselves thinking and responding have fallen behind the lines. Did you see that? Only then do we see that our ways of thinking and responding have fallen behind the times. Shaka Zulu, okay? They were fighting with long spears, firing spears at each other from a distance, okay? They had sandals on that were just basically slippers, house slippers. And when he changed warfare, he became one of the biggest. And they said, well, listen here, here's the challenge. I will take a select group of guys and I'll train them and I'll teach them. And then we'll come against your people and then we'll see. And that's how he came to greatness. So listen here, people. There are times when the old method, it may work for a particular situation, but you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to adapt. The old ways, though they were good for their time, this is a new time. We're dealing with a whole different situation. All right? Now, here we go. I think we're about halfway through the page. Okay. Let's deal with this one right here. He's one of my favorites. The Present War. In 1605, Miyamoto Musashi, who was the greatest swordsman ever to live, are you listening to me? Never lost a duel. A samurai who made a name for himself as a swordsman at the young age of 21 was challenged to a duel. The challenger, a young man named Matashiro, came from the Yoshioka family, a clan itself renowned for swordsmanship. Earlier that year, Musashi had defeated Matashiro's father, Genzaemon, in a duel. Days later, he was killed. Days later, he had killed Genzaemon's younger brother in another duel. The Yoshioka family wanted revenge. I never read any treatises on strategy. When we fight, we do not take any books with us. Are you hearing that? Mao Zedong. Musashi's friend smelled a trap in Masashiro's revenge, and he offered to accompany him to the duel, but Musashi went alone. In his earlier fights with the Yoshikas, he had angered them by showing up hours late. This time, though, he came early and hid in the trees. Matashiro arrived with a small army. Musashi would arrive way behind schedule as usual. One of them said, but that trick won't work with us anymore. Confident in their ambush, Matashiro's men lay down and hid in the grass. Suddenly, Musashi leaped out from behind a tree and shouted, I've been waiting long enough, draw your sword. And one swift stroke, he killed Masashiro, then took a position at an angle to the other men. All of them jumped to their feet, but they were caught off guard and startled. And instead of surrounding them, they stood in a broken line. Musashi simply ran down the line, killing the dazed men one right after another in a matter of seconds. Musashi's victory sealed his reputation as one of Japan's greatest swordsmen. He now roamed the country looking for suitable challenges. In one town, he heard of an undefeated warrior named Baiken, whose weapons were a sickle and a long chain with a steel ball on the end of it. Musashi wanted to see these weapons in action, but Baiken refused. The only way he could see them work was by fighting the duel. So here's from the Book of the Five Rings, which Miyamoto Musashi wrote. Refreshing the mind when you and your opponent are engaged in combat, which is dragging on with no end in sight, it is crucial that you come up with a completely different technique. By refreshing your mind and techniques as you continue to fight your opponent, you will find an appropriate rhythm, timing, which to defeat him. Whenever you and your opponent become stagnant, you must immediately employ a different method of defeating him in order to overcome him. Once again, Musashi's friends chose a safe road and they urged him to walk away. No one had come close to defeating Baiken. Those weapons were unbeatable. Swinging his ball in the air to build up momentum, he would force his victim backward with a relentless charge and then hurl the ball at the man's face. This opponent would have to fend off the ball and chain while the sword arm was occupied. In a brief instant, Baiken would slash him with the sickle across the neck. Ignoring the warnings of his friends, Musashi challenged Baiken and showed up at the man's tent with two swords, one long, one short. Baiken had never seen someone fight with two swords. Also, instead of letting Baiken charge him, Musashi charged first, pushing his foe back on his heels. Baiken hesitated to throw the ball, for Musashi could parry it with one sword and strike with the other. As he looked for an opening, Musashi suddenly knocked him off balance with a blow of the short sword, and then in a split second followed with a thrust of the long one, stabbing him through and killing him once, undefeated Master Baiken. A few years later, Musashi heard about a great samurai named Sasaki Ganru, who fought with a very long sword, a startling, beautiful weapon, which seemed to possess a warlike spirit. This fight would be Musashi's ultimate test. Ganru accepted his challenge. The duel would take place on a little island near Samurai's home. It is disease to be obsessed by the thought of winning. It is also a disease to be obsessed by the thought of employing your swordsmanship. So, it is to be obsessed by the thought of using everything you have learned and to be obsessed by the thought of attacking. It is also a disease to be obsessed and stuck with the thought of ridding yourself of any of these diseases. A disease here is an obsessed mind that dwells on one thing. Because of all these diseases are in your mind, you must get rid of them in order to put your mind in order. All right. I'm really hoping y'all get this thing down. All right. I liked this story when I read it the first time. On the morning of the duel, the island was packed. The fight between the warriors was unprecedented. Ganru arrived on time, but Musashi was late. Very late. 1 hour went by, then 2. Ganru was furious. Finally, a boat was spotted approaching land. Its passengers were lying down, half asleep. It seemed whittling at a long wooden oar. It was Musashi. He seemed lost in thought, staring into the clouds. When the boat came to shore, he tied a dirty towel around his head and jumped out of the boat, brandishing the long oar, longer than Ganru's famous sword. This strange man had come to the biggest fight of his life with an oar for a sword and a towel for a headband. Ganru called out angrily, "Are you frightened of me that you would have broken your promise to be here at 8?" Musashi said nothing. Step closer. Ganru drew his magnificent sword and threw the sheath onto the sand. Musashi smiled. "Sasaki, you have sealed your doom." "Me? Defeated? Impossible. What victor on earth," replied Musashi, "would abandon his sheath to the sea?" This enigmatic remark made Ganru angry. Then Musashi charged, aiming his sharpened oar straight to the enemy's eyes. Ganru quickly raised his sword and struck at Musashi's head, but missed, only cutting the towel of the headband in two. He had never missed before, and almost the instant, Musashi brought down his wooden sword, knocking Ganru off his feet. The spectators gasped as Ganru struggled up. Musashi killed him with a blow to the head. Then, after bowing politely to the men officiating over the duel, he got back in the boat and left as calmly as he arrived. From that moment on, Musashi was considered a swordsman without peer. Anyone can plan a campaign, but few are capable of waging war because only a true military genius can handle the developments and circumstances. All right, let's stay right there. Now, understand this right here, okay? That when we're talking about battle strategies, this is what this book is about, okay? It's about battle strategies. How do you apply this to your own personal self? Well, guess what? You have enemies that you've been walking around with that help you, that are so-called assist you, but they're actually hurting you. They lead you into trouble, and they lead you into places where, you think of their effectiveness. And all you need to do is recognize that it's there and do something different. Do something different. I mean, what's so hard about that? You know what's so hard about it? You not wanting to do it. That's what's hard about any change. Change is not a problem. The idea is you not wanting to do it. You got to be more than willing to make a change. This is what he said. Anybody can plan a campaign. A few people are capable of waging war because only a true military genius can handle the circumstances. Well, guess what? Anybody can change. Anybody can plan to be better, but few are actually able to carry it out. Okay? Because you got to really want this thing in order for it to be right. All right? Now, we're going to stop right there, and we'll take it up tomorrow. Okay, we'll take this up again tomorrow. Now, I'm hoping that you'll be blessed by these. If you happen to go and get them later, they're going to be on excuse me, on YouTube. If you want to see them again, they'll be on YouTube. Okay, at King of Kadesh, and they'll also be on Facebook. Okay. Also, I'm going to need some help soon to improve this work and to push this on, because what we want to do eventually is come together. And once we come together, then we can start to access some of the resources that we have available to us. So send any contribution that will help, to my Cash App, K Kadesh, and send me an email. Send me an email. Let me know that you've had it, because what we want to start doing is we want to start having live conferences, live talking. We want to be able to chat together and exchange ideas. And we need to do it fast, because things are not going as smoothly as we would expect. So, with that being said, I just want to thank you for showing up. I want to thank you for watching, and get in your mind to support this. Okay. And remember, you need to download the book. You need to download it so that you can read along with us on your phone or on your tablet. Tablet's probably better. All right. So it's been a grand time, and it's time to wrap it up. You all have a great day, and remember something. The only thing stopping you from changing is your lack of desire to do it.